$1.50. That is what this costs at the drugstore. And that same brown bottle sitting in your medicine cabinet right now does something to tomato plants that most gardeners spend $40, $50, sometimes $60 a season trying to accomplish with sprays and treatments that do not work nearly as well. I want to be honest with you from the start. This is not about some trick or a shortcut that sounds good, but falls apart when you actually try it. Everything covered here comes from years of growing tomatoes. Real seasons, real problems, real soil. Some summers were good. Some were genuinely rough. And through all of it, this one cheap product kept showing up as the answer to problems I was wasting money trying to solve other ways. Before anything else, drop your state or your USDA hardiness zone in the comments below. Just your state or your zone number, that is all. It sounds like a small thing, but it genuinely helps shape the content on this channel. Growing tomatoes in Zone 4 Minnesota is a completely different challenge from growing them in Zone 9 Texas. And knowing where you are growing makes it possible to give you advice that actually fits your conditions. There are 11 uses on this list. Each one solves a real problem that comes up in a real tomato garden. Some of them you can use this week. Others are worth filing away for the start of next season. And the one labeled number 6, that particular use has rescued more plants from what looked like certain death than anything else on this list. So stay with me through the whole thing. Use number 1, getting your seeds to germinate faster. If you start tomatoes from seed, and if you do not, this might be the year to start. You already know the waiting. You plant those seeds in late January or February. You get them under the grow lights, and then you check the tray every single morning like something is going to be different from the day before. Some varieties pop in 10 days. Others sit there for 3 weeks, making you question everything. Most of that waiting comes down to the seed coat. Tomato seeds have a hard, slightly waxy outer layer that exists for a very good reason. In nature, that coating protects the seed through winter cold, dry spells, and all the other conditions it has to survive before the ground is ready for it. It is genuinely good engineering. The problem is that when you are sitting under grow lights in February trying to get a jump on the season, that same protective coat is working against you. It slows down how quickly moisture can reach the embryo inside, and it delays the whole process of germination getting underway. Hydrogen peroxide addresses this in 2 ways at the same time, and understanding both of them makes it easier to trust the process. First, the peroxide gently softens that outer seed coat, not in a damaging way, just enough to allow water to move through it faster and more evenly. Second, and this is the part that most people miss entirely, as hydrogen peroxide breaks down, it releases oxygen directly onto the seed surface. Oxygen is not just something seeds need after they sprout. It is actually one of the main biological signals that tells a dormant seed the conditions outside are right, and it is time to wake up. You are essentially giving the seed 2 things simultaneously: an easier path for moisture to get in, and a direct signal to start the germination process. The method is simple. 1 teaspoon of standard 3% hydrogen peroxide, the kind in the brown bottle from any drugstore, any grocery store, costs about $1.50. Dissolved into 1 cup of warm water. Not hot, just comfortably warm. Put your tomato seeds in that solution and let them soak for 30 minutes. Some growers go as long as an hour, and it is fine, but 30 minutes is genuinely enough for most tomato varieties. After the soak, rinse the seeds briefly under plain water and plant them straight into your starting mix. The difference shows up pretty quickly. Seeds treated this way typically begin germinating 3 to 5 days earlier than seeds soaked in plain warm water. For gardeners in Zone 5 or Zone 6 who are counting every growing day between last frost and first frost, shaving nearly a week off your germination timeline can mean the difference between ripe tomatoes in August and a frost catching unripe fruit on the vine in early October. This works across varieties. Cherokee Purple, San Marzano, Brandywine, Celebrity, and disease-resistant hybrids like Defiant and Mountain Fresh Plus all respond the same way. The seed coat chemistry does not change based on the variety name on the packet. The peroxide works the same regardless of what you are growing. Use number 2, cleaning your seeds before they ever touch the soil. This one builds directly on what was just covered because the soak from use number 1 is already doing a second job that most gardeners never think about. When you save your own tomato seeds from season to season, and saving seed is worth doing, it is smart, it cuts costs, And over time, you end up with varieties that have been quietly adapting to your specific soil and climate. Those seeds can carry fungal spores and bacteria on the outer coat. That is not a sign anything went wrong. It is simply biology. The warm, moist environment inside a tomato fruit is exactly the kind of place where certain pathogens like to take up residence on the seed surface. Commercial seeds can carry similar issues even with all the assurances on the packet. The source does not matter as much as the habit. Here is what happens when you skip the sanitation step. The seeds go into warm, moist starting mix under the grow lights. The conditions that are ideal for germination. Warmth, moisture, a little darkness at the soil level are also ideal for those hitchhiking pathogens to wake up and get active. Fungal problems appear in the seed tray before the seedlings even have their first true leaves. Sometimes you lose the whole tray and never quite figure out why. The peroxide soak handles this. That same solution, 1 teaspoon of 3% peroxide to 1 cup of warm water, acts as a surface disinfectant on the seed coat. The oxidative action destroys the cellular structure of fungal spores and bacteria on contact. It does not reach deep into the seed itself. It works right at the surface where the problem is living. 30 minutes in that solution and the seeds go into the soil clean rather than carrying a problem with them. For saved seeds specifically, this step is not optional. If the plant those seeds came from showed any early blight or septoria leaf spot last summer, and in most gardens, by late July, something was showing up somewhere. The peroxide soak is what stands between that history and your new seedlings. It is not a guarantee. Nothing in gardening is a guarantee, but it takes a significant portion of the risk off the table before the seed ever touches growing medium. 1 bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide handles seed sanitation for an entire starting season. The cost per use is essentially nothing. Use number 3. Stopping damping off before it takes the whole tray. If you have started tomato seedlings for more than a season or two, there is a good chance you have already met damping off. You go out to check on the seedlings one morning and find plants that looked perfectly healthy the evening before, now collapsed at the soil line, lying flat, as if they were cut off at the base with a pair of scissors. No warning, no recovery. By the time it is visible, those individual plants are already gone. It is one of the most discouraging things that happens in seed starting, and it moves fast. Damping off is caused by a group of soil-dwelling fungi. Pythium, Rhizoctonia, and Fusarium are the main ones, and they exist naturally in most potting mixes and seed-starting media. Their presence alone is not the problem. These organisms become fatal when the soil stays too wet and oxygen disappears from the upper root zone. Anaerobic conditions at the soil surface essentially create the perfect environment for them to go from dormant to destructive. Take the oxygen away and they thrive. That is the actual mechanism, and understanding it explains exactly why hydrogen peroxide works against it. When you water seed trays with a diluted peroxide solution, you are flooding the root zone with oxygen at the most vulnerable moment in the plant's life. You are creating the opposite of the conditions those pathogens need to cause damage. The method is slightly lighter than the seed soak, 1.5 teaspoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water. Use this as your regular watering solution from the first watering after germination. This is a preventative step. Starting it after damping off has already appeared does not save the plants already affected. The goal is to maintain the oxygen balance in the soil before the problem gets a foothold. Gardeners in Zone 7 through Zone 10, particularly in the Southeast and Gulf Coast states, deal with naturally higher humidity during the late winter seed starting period. That ambient moisture makes the conditions for damping off easier to create accidentally. A little too much water on a cloudy day and the soil stays wet longer than it should. The peroxide watering routine is especially worth keeping consistent in those climates. If any of this is new information to you, and for a lot of gardeners, the seed sanitation piece in particular is something nobody ever mentioned, this channel exists specifically for that reason. Real, specific advice without the runaround. Subscribing takes 1 second, and it is the only way the algorithm actually puts the next video in front of you when it goes up. Number 4 and 5 are coming up next, and number 6 is the one that changes how you look at a wilting plant. That one is worth waiting for. Use number 4. Helping transplants recover from shock. Transplant day feels like a victory. You have been nursing those seedlings under the lights for 6, 8, sometimes 10 weeks. The roots are filling the cell trays, the stems are thick, the plants look ready. You get them in the ground on a good day, water them in, and then you wait. And sometimes they just sit there, not dying, but not growing either. Pale, slightly wilted in the afternoon, even after watering, looking like the whole experience of moving from a tray into the ground took something out of them. 2 weeks go by, and the plant looks almost exactly the same as the day you put it in. Meanwhile, the season is moving forward whether the plant is ready or not. Transplant shock is real, and it costs gardeners more of the growing season than most realize. What is actually happening underground explains the whole thing. When a seedling gets pulled from its cell tray and moved into garden soil, the fine root hairs, the tiny, almost invisible structures responsible for actually absorbing water and nutrients, get physically damaged in the process. Not destroyed, but set back. Until those root hairs recover and re-establish contact with the new soil particles around them, the plant is essentially running on whatever reserves it came in with. It cannot take up what it needs efficiently. That is the pallor, the afternoon wilt, the stalled growth. The roots are not ready yet. The soil around the transplant also plays a role. Planting holes disturb the microbial balance in that immediate zone. Freshly dug soil can have pockets of compaction, uneven moisture, and microbial activity that puts additional low-level stress on roots that are already trying to recover. A peroxide drench at transplant time addresses both of these things directly. Flooding the root zone with oxygen right at the moment of transplanting speeds up root cell recovery. It also stabilizes the microbial environment in that planting hole in the same way it does in seed trays, creating aerobic conditions that favor the root's recovery rather than the organisms that take advantage of stressed tissue. 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water. Drench the planting hole in the immediate root zone right at transplant. 1 application at this stage is enough. You are not trying to sterilize the soil, just giving the roots the best possible environment to recover and push forward quickly. Plants treated this way typically show visible new growth within 5 to 7 days of going in the ground. That is not a dramatic claim. It is just what consistently happens when the root zone has what it needs from day one. The difference between a transplant that establishes in a week and one that sulks for 3 is not always soil quality or variety. Sometimes it is simply whether the roots had the right conditions to recover quickly. For gardeners in zone 6 and below, where the window between last frost and first fall frost is tighter than you would like, a week or 2 of transplant shock is not just frustrating. It is a real loss of productive season. Every day a plant spends recovering is a day it is not flowering, not setting fruit, not growing toward the harvest you put all that work in for. Use number 5. Supporting calcium uptake to reduce blossom end rot. Blossom end rot has a way of appearing right when the season feels like it is finally coming together. The plants look healthy, the fruit is sizing up, everything seems on track, and then you flip a tomato over and find that dark, sunken, leathery patch on the bottom. 1 tomato becomes 3, becomes an entire cluster, and if the underlying condition is not corrected, it keeps showing up on new fruit for weeks. Most gardeners blame the soil immediately. They assume the ground is calcium deficient and they reach for a calcium spray or a lime amendment. Sometimes that helps. Often the soil already has adequate calcium and the spray makes very little difference. The problem was never the calcium level to begin with. Blossom end rot is a calcium deficiency inside the plant, but the reason that deficiency exists is almost always about delivery, not supply. Calcium moves through a tomato plant in the water stream. It travels upward from the roots with moisture and gets deposited in the developing fruit tissue. When that water flow gets interrupted by inconsistent watering, by dry spells followed by heavy rain, by compacted or poorly aerated soil that restricts root function, calcium stops reaching the fruit in the amounts the tissue needs during rapid development. The fruit at the blossom end, which is the last tissue to receive what the plant is distributing, shows the deficiency first. Hydrogen peroxide supports this system in a specific, practical way. Regular soil aeration through peroxide applications improves the oxygen content and overall structure of the root zone over time. Better aerated soil supports more consistent root function, which supports more consistent water and nutrient movement through the plant. The peroxide is not delivering calcium. It is maintaining the soil environment that allows the plant to deliver it on its own. 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water applied as a soil drench around the root zone every 10 to 14 days during active fruiting. This works alongside consistent watering, not instead of it. The peroxide supports root zone health. Steady moisture management is still the foundation. Large-fruited varieties are the most susceptible to blossom end rot because their fruit develops quickly and the demand for calcium during that rapid growth period is high. Brandywine, mortgage lifter, big beef. If these are in your garden, the combination of consistent watering and regular peroxide drenches during fruiting is worth making a habit of. Gardeners in Zone 8 through Zone 10 dealing with the kind of hot, dry stretches that interrupt soil moisture in midsummer are at the highest risk and stand to gain the most from keeping this routine consistent. Use number 6. Rescuing a tomato plant that is already dying from root rot. This is the one worth staying for. And it is the one that is hardest to talk about without sounding like an exaggeration, because the results feel more dramatic than anything else on this list. Root rot does not announce itself until it is already serious. The first thing most gardeners notice is wilting, a plant that was upright and healthy looking suddenly drooping in the middle of the day. You water it. It perks up slightly, then wilts again the next afternoon. The leaves start yellowing from the bottom of the plant upward. Maybe the plant sat through a rainy week, or the bed drains poorly, or you had a stretch where it got more water than it needed. Whatever the cause, the soil stayed wet for too long, and what is happening underground is not good. Waterlogged soil loses its oxygen. When that happens, a very specific group of pathogens, primarily Phytophthora and Pythium species, move into the root zone and begin destroying root tissue from the outside in. The roots turn brown, then black, then soft and mushy. They stop functioning. The plant wilts because it genuinely cannot move water anymore. And here is the part that makes root rot particularly cruel. That wilting looks exactly like a plant that needs more water. Some gardeners water more. The root rot gets worse. The plant declines faster. By the time the above-ground symptoms are obvious enough to diagnose, the persistent wilting, the bottom-up yellowing, the plant that just looks sick despite reasonable weather, the root system is already in serious trouble. Most gardeners pull the plant at this point. And honestly, that response makes sense because what you are looking at appears terminal. It is not always terminal. And knowing that has saved plants in this garden that were within a day of being pulled and composted. When hydrogen peroxide contacts organic material in the soil, the molecule breaks apart and releases a single free oxygen atom. That oxygen atom is chemically reactive in a way that is directly lethal to the anaerobic pathogens destroying the root tissue. It does not just inhibit them. The reactive oxygen destroys their cell membranes on contact. At the same time, it reverses the oxygen-depleted soil conditions those pathogens depend on to survive. You are attacking the organisms causing the damage and simultaneously eliminating the environment that allows them to keep causing it. For root tissue that is stressed and damaged but not completely destroyed, and at the early to middle stage of root rot, some viable root mass almost always remains. The oxygen infusion from the peroxide can actually revive root cell function. Roots that were beginning to collapse from suffocation receive a direct oxygen delivery and begin recovering. The method matters here, so pay attention to the specifics. Mix 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water. That is a slightly stronger ratio than the transplant drench. Pour it slowly around the base of the plant and work outward to the drip line, the outer edge of where the foliage extends. Slow application matters. The goal is deep penetration into the root zone, not surface runoff. Pour it like you are watering, not like you are rinsing. After the drench, wait 48 hours minimum before assessing the plant. If the root damage was caught at a recoverable stage, and the fact that the plant is still standing and still has some green on it is a reasonable indicator that some viable root mass remains. Recovery signs typically appear within 3 to 5 days. New growth at the shoot tips. Wilting that stabilizes and stops progressing. The plant stops declining and begins, slowly, to stabilize. If a second application seems warranted, wait a full week before repeating. Not every other day, not daily, a full week. The objective is to restore a healthy balance in the soil biology. Overdoing the peroxide eliminates beneficial soil organisms along with the pathogens and leaves the root zone worse off than it was. The plants this method has saved in this garden were not small seedlings. Full-sized staked and caged plants in mid-July with fruit already set on them. Plants representing 8 weeks of growth from transplant, weeks of feeding and pruning and training. The kind of plant you really do not want to lose in the middle of the season. Do not pull a wilting tomato plant without trying this first. That is not a sales pitch for a product. It is a $1.50 bottle from the drugstore. It is just the most direct piece of advice from everything on this list. If you have made it to use number 6, and this is genuinely new information, that is exactly why this channel exists. There are 5 more uses still to come, including how to fight active fungal disease already visible on your plants, how to protect your harvest after it leaves the vine, and how to stop reinfecting your garden from your own tools season after season. The last segment covers all of it. Use number 7. Fighting fungal disease that is already on your plants. There is a distinction worth understanding before getting into this one, because it changes how you think about every spray product you have ever bought at the garden center. Almost everything marketed as a fungicide, the bottles with the impressive-sounding active ingredients, the ones promising to protect your tomatoes from blight and leaf spot, those products are preventatives. What that means in plain terms is they create a surface barrier on the leaf that stops new fungal spores from landing and establishing. They are building a wall against future infection. They are not designed to touch infection that already exists. Most gardeners do not spray until they see a problem. That is just human nature. You do not treat something until it shows up. So the sequence typically goes. Spots appear on the lower leaves. Gardener heads to the garden center. Gardener buys a fungicide. Gardener sprays it on leaves that already have active disease. The product does roughly what it was designed to do, protects new tissue from new spores, but it does almost nothing for the tissue already showing lesions. The gardener concludes the product does not work. The product was actually used at the wrong time for the wrong purpose. Hydrogen peroxide works differently in a meaningful way. It has direct curative action against active fungal growth on plant tissue. When a diluted peroxide solution contacts a leaf that already has early blight lesions, septorious spots, powdery mildew, or rust, the reactive oxygen released at the point of contact destroys the cell walls of active fungal spores. It is not forming a barrier around them. It is attacking them directly where they are living right now. 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water in a clean spray bottle. Apply it to the affected leaves thoroughly, paying particular attention to the undersides. That is where fungal growth initiates on most tomato diseases. On leaves with active infection, some slight whitening or bleaching of the most severely affected tissue is normal after application. That visible reaction is the oxidative process working. The healthy tissue immediately surrounding those spots is not harmed at this concentration. Apply every 5 to 7 days while disease pressure is active. Between applications, remove the most heavily infected leaves at the base of the plant. Prune suckers to open the canopy and let air move through freely. Lay mulch at the soil line to stop rain and irrigation splash from carrying fungal spores from the ground up onto the lower foliage, because that soil splash is one of the primary ways early blight travels up a plant from the bottom. The peroxide spray works as part of that complete approach. On its own, without the leaf removal and airflow improvements, it slows the disease but struggles to get ahead of it. Combined with those physical management steps, it genuinely turns the tide on infections caught in the early to middle stages. For varieties that carry natural susceptibility to fungal disease, Brandywine, Cherokee Purple, most of the large heirloom types that were bred for flavor rather than disease resistance. Starting a preventative peroxide spray schedule early in the season makes a meaningful difference. Not waiting for spots to appear. Beginning applications in late spring before the humidity climbs and fungal pressure builds. Zone 7 through Zone 10 gardeners, particularly anywhere in the Southeast, the Gulf Coast, or the Mid-Atlantic, know exactly what high-humidity tomato season looks like. The calendar for starting preventative sprays in those regions is earlier than most people assume. Use number 8. Eliminating fungus gnat larvae in containers and seed trays. The adult fungus gnats, the slow, lazy little flies hovering around your container tomatoes or drifting around the seed trays, are mostly a nuisance. They are not doing significant damage themselves. The problem is underground, in the top inch or two of moist potting mix, where their larvae are feeding on fine root hairs and developing root tissue. In a garden bed, a tomato plant has enough root mass to compensate for some surface feeding damage without much visible effect. In a container, that same level of larval activity is a real setback. The root system is restricted. The fine root hairs are proportionally more important to the plant's overall function, and damage that a bed-grown plant shrugs off can genuinely stunt a container tomato's growth. In seed trays, the vulnerability is even greater. Seedlings at that stage have almost no root mass to spare. 1 tablespoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water drenched into the top layer of soil. When the solution contacts the organic matter in the potting mix, it fizzes. That fizzing is visible and it is real. It is the oxygen release happening, and those same oxygen bubbles are directly lethal to the soft-bodied larvae in the soil. They are not adapted to survive an oxidative environment. The contact kill is rapid. Within a few hours, the peroxide has completely broken down into water and oxygen. No chemical residue remains. Nothing needs to be rinsed out. The soil is simply better oxygenated and the larval population is significantly reduced. For an active infestation, 2 applications 3 days apart typically resolves the problem. The adult flies will still be visible for a few days after. They live out their cycle above the soil. But without larvae successfully developing, the population collapses on its own within a week or so. Use number 9. Controlling aphids and spider mites without leaving residue on the fruit. Aphids cluster on the undersides of tomato leaves and on new growth at the shoot tips. Spider mites show up during hot, dry stretches, usually July and August, and leave fine webbing on the undersides of leaves while the upper surface starts looking dusty and bronzed. Both of them spread faster than most gardeners expect, and both are being managed in most home gardens right now with spray products that leave residue on fruit that is weeks away from harvest. Hydrogen peroxide works against soft-bodied insects through direct contact. Aphids and spider mites both have a protective waxy coating that prevents them from drying out. Peroxide disrupts that coating on contact. It also kills eggs directly when the spray reaches them. The oxidative surface environment it creates is one these insects genuinely cannot tolerate. 2 teaspoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water in a spray bottle. Apply directly to leaf undersides where aphids cluster and where spider mite eggs are concentrated. Apply in the early morning or evening, never in direct midday sun. In full afternoon heat, the solution evaporates too quickly off the leaf surface, reducing contact time and occasionally causing minor leaf stress from the concentrated residue left behind as the water disappears. 1 to 2 applications 3 days apart handles a moderate infestation reliably. For a plant already heavily covered, leaves curling, significant webbing across multiple branches, physically remove the worst affected foliage first, then follow with the spray on what remains. The peroxide is most effective when it is not working against an overwhelming population. Unlike neem oil, which leaves an oily coating on leaf surfaces and fruit skin and can affect beneficial insects visiting the plant, diluted peroxide breaks down completely within hours of application. Nothing accumulates on the fruit. No pre-harvest interval to track. No residue in the soil. Use number 10. Disinfecting tools and equipment between seasons. The cages, stakes, pruning shears, and pots from last year are not just dirty. They are carrying live biology, overwintering fungal spores, bacterial populations, and disease pathogens on every surface that spent the season in contact with tomato foliage and soil. A tomato cage that leaned against blighted stems all summer long is not a clean piece of metal after the season ends. A pair of pruning shears that move between plants removing infected leaves is not a neutral tool the following spring. The disease does not disappear when the season ends. It waits. Standard 3% hydrogen peroxide, applied directly without dilution, kills overwintering fungal spores and bacteria on hard surfaces the same way it destroys them on leaf tissue and in soil through direct oxidative contact. For pruning shears and small hand tools, apply it straight from the bottle and let it sit for a few minutes before wiping clean. For tomato cages and larger metal equipment, apply liberally and let the equipment stay wet for 10 to 15 minutes before rinsing. Bleach is the traditional alternative and it works, but it corrodes metal tools over time and requires thorough rinsing to remove residue before anything contacts soil or plants. Peroxide breaks down completely into water and oxygen. No corrosion, no residue, no fumes to avoid in an enclosed space. The pruning shear habit is worth building into every session in the garden. A small spray bottle of straight 3% peroxide in a back pocket, wiped across the blades between plants. 5 seconds. That single habit eliminates one of the most consistent and most overlooked ways disease travels through a tomato patch, on the gardener's own hands and tools moving from plant to plant. Use number 11. Extending how long harvested tomatoes stay good. Most gardeners assume the clock starts running the moment a tomato leaves the vine, and there is not much to be done about it. The tomato will ripen, soften, and eventually go bad on its own timeline. The natural ripening process is not what causes a beautiful tomato to develop a soft, watery patch seemingly overnight. That rapid surface deterioration is almost always microbial. Bacteria and fungal organisms on the skin of the tomato. Picked up in the garden, from handling, from contact with surfaces during storage. Begin consuming the fruit from the outside once it is off the vine and the plant's natural defenses are no longer active. 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of cool water. Submerge freshly harvested tomatoes in that solution for 30 minutes. The peroxide destroys the surface pathogens on the tomato skin before they begin the deterioration process. After the soak, remove the tomatoes and let them air dry completely on a clean towel before placing them anywhere for storage. Do not refrigerate unless the tomato is already fully ripe and needs 1 or 2 extra days. Cold storage below 55 degrees breaks down the enzymatic processes that produce a tomato's flavor and dramatically degrades the texture. A tomato that went into the refrigerator tasting like a real tomato often comes out tasting like almost nothing. Room temperature storage after the peroxide wash gives better flavor and longer shelf life simultaneously. Tomatoes that would hold 5 days without any treatment routinely hold 8 or 9 days after this wash. For anyone harvesting in volume during late season, and late season often means tomatoes coming in faster than they can be eaten, processed, or given away, that extension changes the math entirely. More time to make sauce, more time to enjoy them fresh, less pressure watching a counter full of fruit race toward the compost bin. The peroxide started its work when the seeds went into the soak tray. This wash is the final step in a process that runs from germination to the table. A quick note on using this safely. Every dilution in this video is based on standard 3% hydrogen peroxide, the brown bottle from the drugstore. That is the only concentration appropriate for home garden use. If you encounter 35% food-grade hydrogen peroxide online and consider buying it because it seems like better value, do not. That concentration causes immediate chemical burns on skin contact and destroys plant tissue without precise dilution. It is not a product for the home garden. Store your 3% peroxide in a cool, dark location and use it within the season. An open bottle sitting in a warm garage loses potency fast. A simple freshness test. Place a drop on a small cut or scratch. Active fizzing means it is still working. No fizzing means it has degraded to essentially plain water. One more practical point. Hydrogen peroxide and vinegar are both useful in the garden separately. Mixed together in the same container, they form peracetic acid, which is significantly more corrosive and damages plant tissue. Use them on different days and never in the same spray bottle. 30-plus years of growing tomatoes teaches you that the most useful knowledge rarely comes from the most expensive source. A $1.50 bottle handles 11 real problems that show up in a real tomato garden. Seed germination, surface sanitation, damping off, transplant shock, blossom end rot support, root rot rescue, active fungal disease, larvae in containers, aphids and mites, equipment sanitation, and post-harvest shelf life. Every one of those problems has a product on the garden center shelf designed to solve it. Every one of them responds to something already in your medicine cabinet. Which of these 11 uses was new to you? And which one are you planning to try first? Leave that in the comments along with your state or USDA zone. Both pieces of information help shape what gets covered on this channel, and the comments here are genuinely read. If this channel is not already in your subscriptions, that is worth fixing. The next video will not find you unless the algorithm knows you are here. One tap on the subscribe button, and it does. Go pick up a bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide. The season is not going to wait.